Programming is based on a very simple idea. That idea is that we take some information, we want to do something with it, and then at the end of all that, we want to get a new result. This is the premise of any programming language. So let's start out. If we have some information that we want to do something with, we need a way to access it or to reference it. We'd like to be able to call each block of information by name to make it easier to pass that info through our script and transform it. We call that name a variable. Now in JavaScript, there are several types of information that we can connect to a variable, and we're going to look at four main types just briefly. The first is called a string. You can think of a string much as if it were a sentence. It's not structured in any specific way, it's just a series of characters that we assign to a variable. Another type of information that we might assign to a variable is a number. Now there's actually two types of numbers that we'll deal with. The first are integers, which as you learned in math are just whole numbers with no decimal places. Then there's floats, which for our purposes are just numbers with decimals. The third type of information we might assign to a variable is a list of strings. This is called an array. Now having a list of strings assigned to one variable makes it easy to handle larger amounts of related information. It also makes it easy to transform all the values in that array with just one set of rules instead of repeating your code over and over and over for each different variable. Now the fourth type of variable is called an object. And objects are a little easier explained later on once we've had some of the other fundamentals out of the way first, so we'll get back to those later. So for today we're just going to talk about the first three: strings, numbers, and arrays. So when you define a variable in for the first time in JavaScript, you're going to use the var keyword. And then you're going to give a name. You're going to pick a name for what you want that variable to be called. So you can use just about anything that starts with a letter and is full of letters, numbers, and underscores. So we could say Joe. We'll just use that as a variable name. Then we can actually assign some information to it. So in this case, I'm going to assign a string. So we're going to, each string is encased in quotes. So I'm going to open a quote and I'm going to put in some text. And then I'm going to close that quote and put a semicolon at the end to show that that line of code is finished. So at that point we've assigned a string to a variable called Joe. The next variable we might do is we're going to say Joe's age maybe, and we're going to assign a number to it. So we'll say 25. Now you notice when we're working with numbers we didn't have to actually put quotes around it because we actually understand that this information is specifically relevant as a number. So we might do let's do math with it or something like that, and we're actually going to use that information. Whereas with a string, we don't know exactly what's in it, we just know it's a string of characters and it's sort of anonymous to us, if you will. So we're going to say Joe's height maybe, and this is called a float, so we might say that it is 6.5. Alright, now as we said, a float is just, for our purposes, just a number with a decimal place to it. And then we said that we can have an array, which is a list of strings. So we might say Joe's shoes, and we're going to say that it's a new array, and we're going to wrap it in parentheses. And inside those parentheses, we're going to list out all the strings that we want to assign to this particular array. So we might say Nike, Reebok, and Adidas. So each one of these is a separate string separated by commas, and of course you've got your quotes still around them, and so we use those, and we can actually, we'll show later on how you can iterate through them and actually apply rules and logic to them, to each individual one. But for this sake, you just see that we've got three different values assigned to one variable. Now there's a couple different ways that you can assign arrays, so let's look at another potential way you could do it. You could say Joe's shoes equal, and just put in empty brackets there, and that shows is essentially the same syntax as new array, except it's a little bit easier to work with. Then we can come in and say Joe's shoes with the bracket 0 equals Nike. And actually I don't need to put the var on there. After it's been defined the first time, we're good to go on that. Then we could come in and say Joe's shoes 1 equals Reebok. And as you can imagine, Joe's shoes 2 equals Adidas. Now we did the exact same thing here as we did on line 7, and that is we assigned 3 different values. You'll see the 0, the 1, and the 2. Those are called keys, and so that's how we actually can reference. If we want to pull out that information that we've assigned as Reebok, we could actually reference Joe's shoes brackets 1 to get that information back out. So that's it for variables, and we'll come back and talk about what we can do with those variables in the next video.